Well, here we are for the wrap-up, right? This, it couldn't be a more timely topic today. And I was hoping that we would see Jennifer Loon so we would get an update, up-to-the-minute update from the governor's residence where these talks are continuing. Maybe some of you know more and can clue us in about that. But let's pretend it's a recap and look back over this last session. This is the year that the achievement gap really moved into the political spotlight at the legislature. It's been something that's been a hand-wringing topic. Some of you have been working on it for many years. It may feel as though it's always been your focus, certainly always been the focus of this group. But this year it moved into the political top tier, and it did so, I think, when Governor Mark Dayton put a proposal for universal preschool into his budget and made it a top gubernatorial priority. Now, that might have been a moment for a victory lap, but for the fact that the details of his proposal disappointed some of the advocates who had been working for a very long time on a different approach more focused on the achievement gap through the use of scholarships. So a tussle developed between those who favored a universal preschool approach, something akin to kindergarten, versus the scholarship approach, which would reach down to children as young as 1 year old and was sort of akin to vouchers. Vouchers have been a dirty word in some parts of our education community. Yes. So this tussle has continued and it wound up being a part of the ingredient that caused Governor Dayton to veto the education bill. 2 other vetoes followed, and here we are with a special session yet to be scheduled, but one that will certainly be scheduled in the next week or 2. So where folks came down on this question sort of depended on what question you asked. I suggested that in a column. If the question was, what do we do with 4-year-olds, you might get a different answer than ask that if you were to ask the question, what about the achievement gap? If the achievement gap is your top priority, and the existence of this group tells me that you tend to think should be our top priority, then I think the scholarship approach had more weight. That had the support of the editorial page of the Star Tribune. So now today we are at a situation where Governor Dayton says he has backed off his top priority. He's not alone in doing that. The state Senate DFL, we have Senate DFLers here, they said their top priority at the beginning of the session would be transportation. A transportation bill did not pass. The House Republicans, and we have a House Republican caucus member here today, said their top priority would be a cut in taxes. Tax bill didn't happen. We're not going to do universal preschool a la kindergarten either. Governor Dayton has just in the last few days retracted from that top priority. But we will have some combination, yet to be determined, of school-based programs and scholarships. I'll ask this panel, what combination should that be? And we'll get started with that. First, let me introduce these good folks. Closest to me is State Representative Sondra Erickson, serving her 9th term, a Republican from Princeton, Minnesota, and the chair of the Education Innovation Committee, a committee whose work very much ties with the interest of this group. Senator Patricia Torres-Ray, serving her 3rd term, DFLer from South Minneapolis, and chair of the State and Local Government Committee, but very active through many years on the Education Committee. And then as our raw recruit, State Senator Greg Clausen from Rosemont. Greg is serving his 1st term, a DFLer, and he is a former school principal, longtime principal of the Rosemont School District, so brings a wealth of expertise to this issue as well. Well, friends, what about this combination of school-based programs versus scholarships? What are you rooting for to come out of the smoke-filled room, or the room where the white smoke comes out at the governor's residence? Representative Erickson, why don't you start and we'll go down the line. What are you rooting for?
Well, I suspect that there will be more dollars for scholarships, which will delight me. In my visit most recently with Art Rolnick and with others, the need to address the need of our very young learners who are caught up in situations for which they were not responsible. And so if you're born into a home with a single mom, there's no father present, or not very often present, or the situation is a result of some other circumstance, could be poverty, long-term poverty, and the fact that we have worked now for years to bring about a program that can address the needs of parents like that and others who are caught in these situations whereby their children don't grow up having their moms and dads read to them at bedtime, for example, or hug them or nurture them. I mean, something is lacking, and so the children are being left behind. And the scholarships provide the opportunity for quality daycare, childcare, preschool situations in which that very youngest learner can begin the path to being ready for kindergarten, we like to say. I guess now it's ready for preschool, in a sense. But the scholarships are an opportunity for that mixed delivery, and that's something that I believe in very strongly, because we already do have a very vibrant readiness program throughout the state. We have, I think, over 260 programs that are in place, and some of them are more preschool than they are readiness, but we have that. We have excellent ECFE, early learning opportunities for parents, and what I want to say is that I think that program has missed the mark to a certain extent, because when I was a young mother, they were asking me to participate, and I said, whoa, 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 I think my husband and I are okay. We do a lot of reading. We read the best books, we think, on child rearing, and you know, I'm a teacher, we're both educated. I don't think it's for us. I think it's for other parents who are not getting this opportunity maybe to be raised like my husband and I were. So I think ECFE has to reach out, but it's still an excellent program. And besides that, we created the Parent Aware program that has now evolved into a rating system that I think is very respectable. And I know in rural Minnesota, where I live, my providers are eager to become a part of Parent Aware, and that brings quality. So I know Art Rolnick would say, you know, early learners, the earliest learners first, parents in need first, and be sure that they're in quality programs. So I'm hoping we have more dollars for scholarships, and that there's an emphasis on more dollars for school readiness and ECFE and Head Start as well. I have very active Head Start programs in rural Minnesota, and they're doing good. And so let's have this mixed delivery, and then the preschool programs that are in place. You know, I love Montessori. I have a daughter-in-law who's involved in Montessori. She and her sister here in Minnesota, my daughter-in-law on the West Coast, very steeped in Montessori. And so we want delivery systems that address the very vast differences we have among our little learners. And we stay that way. Remember, I'm different from these two senators, and they differ from each other. We had different learning styles, we have different interests, we grow up that way, so why not address that with our youngest learners?
Well, thank you for getting us going on this. And Senator Torres-Ray, you're next. What are you rooting for as this negotiation continues?
I'm rooting for a very responsible approach. We are going to look into how to spend $7 billion, and I think that this conversation about how to invest these very few dollars in preschool programs is just a very tiny slice of the pie. So I think what I would like to remind all of you is that at the beginning, when we introduced the public to our targets, when we announced the targets, the House only put $157 million target as new dollars for education. Then the Senate came with a target of 350, which was double that. But the governor, from the very beginning, now, neither house, either the Senate or the House, said how we were going to spend the money. None of us say pre-K or higher ed. We say nothing. We just say we want this money, and that's what we announced. Now, the governor, however, announced really, really, really early that he wanted $695 million. That's what he did. And he said very clearly, I want pre-K as one of my top priorities. Now, when he ran for office, he said, I want to increase taxes on the wealthy in order to fund education. That was very clear. That was 5 years ago. Well, he has to deliver on that. So many of us believe that that conversation was not clear. It was not stated in the terms that Minnesota really needed and wanted. And instead, we carved out this small piece of the pie and began to talk about our political messaging as to what the scholarships do and how these scholarships are vouchers and how pre-K programs are really funding public education. And that's how we divided a very well-organized campaign for young children. And I am incredibly disappointed that this messaging that divided a very strong coalition, as a matter of fact, many of you are here, this coalition began to form about 20 years ago when we decided that we needed to invest in programs that really put funding and quality education behind programs that really understand what brain development is all about. That's what this coalition is about, and I believe that there is a space for both pre-K programs. If you really want to dive into the conversation about fully funding pre-K, you know that the cost just to put care in place, not facilities, it's $695 million, right? So add to that the facilities that need to be in place throughout the state of Minnesota. So the rhetoric around the 50 million that we're going to put in scholarships and perhaps the 60 that come from pre-K is so incomplete and so irresponsible that I believe that neither of us are really fully talking about what it takes to take care of our young children. So that's my message today, and I hope that you help us really speak about the importance of truly investing in young children and not just carving out what is convenient for our political constituencies.
Okay, thank you for those comments, and we certainly will get back to some of the issues that you raised. Senator Clausen, what are you rooting for at this stage?
Well, again, I was drafted as I walked into the room.
That's right, he was.
But
That's good.
that was good. I was planning on listening today. Representative Erickson talked about the achievement gap, and I think what we have in Minnesota to a large degree, and she alluded to this, is an opportunity gap for our youngest learners. Some of those young people, the day they're born, are into an achievement gap that just gets greater as the years go by. I think at this stage, and looking at where we're at with the negotiations between the House and the governor, I think we're going to be looked at targeted services. We started down that road a few years ago with the scholarships that we've talked about, school readiness programs. I'm hoping that there'll be a fully funded Head Start that'll come out of this session. We know right now we have a waiting list around the state, and that would be another move in the right direction. I think that we can serve a number of students. During the session, I think I had 4 opportunities to be in the same room with the governor. One was I was invited to a breakfast meeting where we talked about this issue. And my concern has been all along that I think there has to be a long-range plan for this. The problem that we have, and I represent Rosemount, Apple Valley, Eagan Public Schools, District 196. It's the 4th largest district in the state with about 28,000 E12 students. To implement universal pre-K would mean that 100 additional classrooms would have to be found in that district. We don't have the infrastructure to do that right now, nor do we have the funding to do that right now. But I think along with that universal pre-K, there has to be some dollars spent on how do we gear up for this? How do we gear up so that we have those classrooms available and the materials so that we can really give a quality program to those students? The other part of it that I shared, and kind of a funny story, we were sitting at breakfast with the governor, and being a first-term person, I'm doing a lot of listening and I'm doing some talking. And so the governor was like this, and I said, "Governor," and whoa, he sat down real quick, and I thought maybe I'm speaking out of term here because I had a point that I wanted to make, and that again was my district, 100 classrooms that we were short. But along with that, if we didn't get 2% on the student formula, it was going to be a $15 million cut in District 196, over 100 classroom teachers being laid off. And we're also, next fall, going for a bond. We need another elementary school in that district because we're growing. We've got new homes that are being built in that area everywhere you turn, it seems. So I think there's a lot of good research that's been done about universal pre-K and the benefits of that. I don't think that can really be disputed. You can turn to the European countries that are leaders in education. They all have universal pre-K that begins many times at age 3. So I think that it certainly is something that we should be working towards. But along with that, we need to provide funding for infrastructure, teacher training, so we get to that point where we can really fully implement a universal pre-K program.
Okay, well, one of the things that we are hearing about, and for some of us it's new, the program called School Readiness was funded substantially in the Senate bill, and then in the bill that the governor vetoed that took us to the place we are today. There was about an equal amount of money, as I recall, was it $30 million each for school readiness and for scholarships. Some folks were surprised to see something called school readiness being funded to that extent. Can you clue us in about whether school readiness is the right way to go? Maybe Senator Clausen, you can help us understand the school readiness program dating back to 1992.
Yes, early childhood education, I think, is a good example of that. Again, somewhat targeting needed education for young people based upon a number of different factors. We've all heard of the problem we're having, the upsurge in autism amongst young people, providing services at a young age for those children, children that are in poverty that Representative Erickson again talked about. Another factor that enters into this, I was reading recently in a Pew study that Minnesota is the highest percentage of working moms in the nation.
Has been for many years. Yeah.
And that plays into it as well, there's no question.
But help us understand, maybe Senator Torres-Ray can help, and Representative Erickson too, school readiness. What does that program do? Is that program a substitute for universal pre-K?
I am not clear that we were clear about what that means, because as you remember, the Senate put 70 million into the school readiness category, and then the House put 9. And so I think that in that umbrella of school readiness, our interpretation was that we will carve out a little bit of money for pre-K, a little bit of money. Now, the Senate also added a specific category for scholarships on 30 million that was separate from the 70 million. Now, I'm not clear as to originally what the House, I think the House put 30 million on scholarships in the original proposal as well.
I think that's right.
So in all of that we were, and so how did we divided the pie of school readiness and preschool and scholarships was unclear to everyone.
And
whether there was
so.
no, if you remember, Head Start funding in either house. And then these proposals began to shape in my view, in a very political way. It was quite interesting that each one took an approach and defended that approach to the very end. Ironically, if you see the end, it's none of us got what we really, really wanted. Mm-hmm. So it's a very interesting process of negotiation where the Senate comes with this, I always argue that, senators are kind of in the middle and we just want to be the reasonable person like everybody's looking for. Yeah, you're reasonable, so I want to stand with you. In politics today, that reasonable approach is just kind of nobody knows what the Senate really wanted, other than we made a very clear attempt to work on facilities, because we thought that was an issue that people were saying, well, if we put all of that money into pre-K, we need facilities. So that was an opportunity for us to come in with a new voice, but as you can tell, nobody said, oh yeah, we really like facilities, so we're going to get behind facilities with the Senate. Mm-hmm. So it became kind of a House and governor position on pre-K versus scholarships. And again, it was because how it was framed politically, in my view, more than what is necessary to fully fund it. So I think this whole conversation around learning readiness became, in my opinion, too political, and then people got confused, and we had the Head Start program saying, you really need to fund because we have this waiting list and all of that. And then we began to hear all of the specifics of the specific programs that really needed to be funded at a level to continue to open doors.
Okay, well, how about it, Representative Erickson, if we see a final bill where money is divided between a scholarship approach for young learners and school readiness, should this group cheer?
Well, I suspect Representative Loon is cheering for school readiness because we believe it's a program that has survived more than a couple of decades, in targeting our learners. And districts in rural Minnesota, where I live and where I used to teach, really the intent of the school leaders who are involved in preparing for school is to find those families in rural Minnesota in which the children are behind. And that comes about through screening, it comes about through medical doctors' notations, it comes about through friends and family, and we really think that's worked well in rural Minnesota to bring the children into readiness and to begin those stages of learning. They learn executive function at the same time that they're learning their colors and they're learning their letters and their numbers, which they may not have had an opportunity to learn at home. So it's a very, targeted approach, but it's also very functional and very fundamental. And I think that's where we believe we're doing pretty well. And I know we have not put money into school readiness in past years, but when you look at the whole scheme of things, and we looked at rural Minnesota, it seems to be a good match. And so I suspect that Representative Loon is lobbying for that. But I've not talked to her in a couple of days, so I'm not sure. But
so a scholarship plus school readiness funding increase suits you?
Yes, plus ECFE and Head Start. I have Head Start programs in my area, but I know they're throughout rural Minnesota, and I know there's a waiting list. I think more dollars and scholarships will help that. But targeting is what we need to think about. And one size fits all was my opposition to the governor's universal 4-year-old program. I have, I support public schools. I was there for 36 years as a teacher. But parents like to have choice. In Minnesota, we're this big choice state. And we can't forget that since Rudy Perpich, was governor, and open enrollment came about in PSCO, and then we went on to Ember Reichgott Jung's charter schools, and all these led by Democrats. I think that we should all be supporting a mixed delivery, but targeting is important.
As this disagreement accelerated at the Capitol, intensified at the Capitol, there were a lot of accusations flung about the real motives and the adult interests involved. And I'd like each of you to sort of respond to some of the nastier things that were said. For example, it was said that the whole notion of universal pre-K is just a sop to the teachers' unions and as a way for the Education Minnesota ranks to grow. Senator Clausen and Representative Torres-Ray, what do you think of that accusation?
Well, I think the reality of it is true. I mean, as you implement universal pre-K, that means you're going to have more teachers will join the teachers union. As far as factoring for my decision and where I stand on that issue, it was a non-issue for me. But it is a reality. If you're going to do universal pre-K in the public schools, you're probably going to increase the teacher union ranks.
Senator Torres-Ray, did this proposal look like any kind of payback to you?
I have been a very strong proponent of scholarships, and I have been very active in the movement of elevating this whole conversation about young children and how we need to invest. I think what is a tragedy that took place this year, again, is that as these political leaders announce their priorities, these particular coalitions decided to frame those priorities in their own terms. And that's a different thing. Mm-hmm. So when you adopt, when you see, the governor wants $695 million, he wants pre-K, so immediately you have the Speaker of the House saying, well, there's not going to be pre-K, so I'm going to go for scholarships. Well, the House was not a very strong scholarship proponent in the past. They have not been saying that we need to invest. So you have to be, in my opinion, if you are a child advocate that is really looking as to how do we invest in young children, you have to take that with just kind of some trepidation. I feel that Leroy Stump presented in the Senate floor something incredibly important, and he said this in the caucus. If we were able to put $695 million into pre-K, this state will be in a very different place in education. And he explained how when you have a young child that comes to the school system and becomes a student, now, that people have problems with saying, well, you're going to put that 4-year-old in a desk and then you're going to treat, no. When you just put that qualifier, you get transportation for that child, you get after-school programs for that child, you get ELL for that child, you get free and reduced lunch if that child lives in poverty. That is very significant. When do you think we're going to get there with the scholarship conversation? Probably never. So then the scholarship movement say, we have some very important aspects of child care and early childhood education targeted approach that you cannot lose. We've done cultural competent, systemic approach. We have trained teachers in centers that they are not going to be able to come into the system because they don't have the accreditation that is required by the schools. They cannot be part of the union. This flexibility that is going to be in the neighborhood. You're going to lose all of that if you put pre-K programs. That is true. As a person of color who have worked with these preschool programs to do this targeted approach that is culturally relevant in the neighborhood with the parents, parent involvement, you will lose a lot of that in the schools. Instead of talking about how do we form the perfect package for young children, we took these pieces and divided. I was one that was completely in the middle of that. I didn't want to lose all of these targeted, culturally relevant approach that was really worked hard to institute by this scholarship movement and all of the pre-K programs. But I also saw the value of infusing $695 million into pre-K and how long it will take. It will take my entire life to secure that funding for public education. So why don't we put the two and two together? No, instead, we just took a political approach and decided, oh, well, the Democrats are with the unions, the teachers just won the pre-K programs because this is all about union organizing teachers, and the House just won the scholarship programs because this is a voucher program, and they just want to privatize the schools, and they want to move in that direction. And
well, indeed, that's part of what was said about the voucher program, but there was something, I think, more pointing to adult self-interest, and that is that the scholarship program serves the interests of large providers of childcare, especially institutional ones, whose business model depends on 4-year-olds being in their centers, not in public school. Representative Erickson, as a defender of scholarships, please respond to that accusation that this was all about protecting existing providers of childcare.
Well, certainly in rural Minnesota, the concern about a universal 4-year-old program did raise a great deal of concern. But I just want to say something about Education Minnesota and what has been said about their intent. When I met with them, my question to them was, so your number one priority is universal 4-year-olds, but really tell me what you're going to do to close the achievement gap. Because you once were, my leaders. I was a card-carrying union member for those 30-some years. And, I think your focus should be on what do we really look at in the classroom, in the home. Is it strategies for addressing need and differences in learning style? What is it? Tell me. But they didn't have anything to tell me. And so I was frustrated. And, so I think you can easily draw the conclusion, well, then they must have another motive. Because their number one priority was universal 4-year-olds, and next it was closing poverty, and it was getting, wraparound schools, community schools. And I was befuddled because as a member of the union, I felt they were there to help me become a better teacher. Anyway, I went off the edge a little bit there, but what about? I did want to respond to that because I don't think about that. I think about the learners. I mean, that was what was most important to me in my classroom, and still is, because I still teach. I have Sunday school students every Sunday, and they're 5th, 6th, and 7th graders, which I didn't spend a lot of time teaching. And I have a 4-year-old grandson, so I'm getting this whole universal picture again, but. We really have to find an answer to, what is it we can do long term, because just, if we invest all these dollars in all these programs, will there actually be a payout in the future? Peter Bell wrote a very interesting opinion piece, maybe it was yesterday, in noting that you never know what's going to happen in the future. So you can't say that for every dollar invested there will be a $7 return or anything like that, because we don't know. But I see Representative Mullery in the audience.
Yes,
and
thank you for acknowledging him. I was going to do that too.
I want to say,
yes.
One thing
Hello,
that
Representative Mullery.
certainly
Glad to have you.
Representative Mullery and I agree on is home visits. And in the House bill, we have some dollars for a program. In fact, it's a Jewish program that is excellent in its results. in-home visits, and they address needs. And I talk to my public health folks in Mille Lacs County, which is a very difficult county to represent because we have such a vast array of diversity and need. And I tell them, you know, it's so important, and I appreciate so much if you make home visits, because then you're connecting with those parents, or if it's a parent. And that's where you need to start, is with the parent and the child. And then Education Minnesota, please focus on how do we improve learning. Is it, you know, improving teachers? Is it improving the other knowledge that they have to have? Is it some skill level? You know, help them, because you represent them. And don't get off on a tirade about, you know, some program and then have the you know, like some of my colleagues say, well, it's just more union members. So
Will public advocacy at this point in time still make a difference with days left? Is everything in education still on the table, or will the discussion be limited to pre-K issues at this point? We know that the money has been set, $525 million in new money over the next 2 years. That's what the headline was this morning. We don't know much else. Is everything else still in play? Do any of you know?
I think it is.
It seems to be.
I know that one thing the governor wants is more dollars for American Indian education. And we were a little bit weak in that area in the House. We didn't go to the extent he did, because I argued with the commissioner that, you know, we have to be very careful when we start going into the arena of federal education mandates. And the BIE schools, and I have one in my district at Onamia, at Nashing, the Mille Lacs Band. They have 2 beautiful buildings. They provide just a vast array of opportunity for their children. And, you know, the federal government has helped them somewhat, but they're a pretty wealthy tribe, so they can do what they need to do. The other 3 BIE schools, the federal government needs to get off its, you know what, and do something about helping those schools if those 3 tribes want to continue to have education in their setting of cultural and spiritual, because that's really what they want to be private, and yet, you know, the governor is saying, well, let's put public dollars in and start sending them equalization, sending them more per pupil. And, you know, I don't think we've had a good discussion on what this is. So that's one thing that's on the table.
Okay, well, I hear something else, sort of a lament in this question. Will advocacy at this time still make a difference?
No.
I hear frustration with the process here. And I'm frustrated with the process. We have had no open meetings to speak of since May 5th.
But that's Governor Dayton. Excuse me, that's Governor Dayton. I went through this in special session in 2011. And I said to him, where are my DFL friends? I want Mindy Greiling here. I don't care if she and I don't agree. I want her here at the table.
Well, as a reporter who spent
so,
plenty of time outside the governor's office in the last 2 governorships as well, I think that we have a trend rather than something unique to Mark Dayton here. But we have a very closed process at this point, senators, and I'd like your comments on that.
Well, this has been the most disappointing session in my 10 years. I believe that the leaders who chose this path, which are the Speaker and the Majority Leader and the Governor, have circumvented a very important process of democracy, and you need to be very attentive to that. Minnesota is #1 in the nation when it comes to, you know, presenting debates, open forums for policy. It's really what we are recognized for. Today, what we have done is really leave everything for the last 3 days. It happened behind doors in a locked mansion, and only 3 people and their faithful staff were able to allow to get in. I believe that this is undemocratic. I believe that it left out not only the voices of the people, but also experts. In the Senate and the House, both, we have ample hearings where, you know, we don't have expertise in all the areas.
Right.
We don't. But we draw expertise from the public, from people. You know, people can say whatever they want to say about lobbyists, but we have some of the most educated, informed, well-prepared lobbyists and activists who come to us to present ideas. I think that process was circumvented this year, and I am incredibly upset, offended by that. that 3 people, make decisions on behalf of the 201, and I think it's a problematic process. So the answer today is I don't know what is going to happen.
Yeah.
I think we have some priorities. Certainly in the Senate, we decided that facilities is a very important issue. Indian education was a very important issue. We had some technical education that was part of what we proposed, and college proposals that were included, but I don't know what's going to come out. So unfortunately, you will have a very different proposal coming out without any input from most of us.
Well, I certainly don't disagree with what Senator Torres Reyes said, but I'd like to remind people we started hearings in January. So I don't think it's a lack of information. I don't think it's a lack of not knowing what the issues are. It's more of setting priorities. And I certainly agree that that is being left right now to a very small group, no question about it. And I tend to agree that we're kind of sitting on the outside, all of us here, until those agreements are reached, and then we'll get called back to look that over and eventually vote. So,
well, there may be editorials in a newspaper near you on this topic. Yes.
And I think it was you who said that we blame the building.
Well,
You tweeted that.
well, actually, I wrote a little blog post about that. This session was different in terms of public participation because of the facility.
Yeah.
I remember, and Representative Erickson probably does too, in the 2005 session, we similarly had a year when the education bid from the governor and the initial bids from the legislature were fairly low. And one afternoon, and I think late March, senators looked outside their Capitol windows and saw 10,000 people and rode buses all the way up to the cathedral, and that changed the course of that education discussion. And we
That was in March.
It was at the end of March, yes, but we didn't have that opportunity this year all year because there was no place to gather like that, and it did change the dynamic of the session. It did. Folks, I'd like to hear a little bit about how this preschool issue connects with child care. One question asks, do we want to provide child care for children under age 4 for all poor working parents, so they can get the socialization and play which will increase their preparation for and the enjoyment of learning? That makes me want to bring into the discussion an old program that we cut in 2003 and never built back up, basic sliding fee child care. Where does all that fit, Representative Erickson?
Well, I think there's certainly a place for a basic sliding fee. I haven't been a part of those discussions. Certainly there's a need for child care. Is it also preschool? Yes, to a great extent it is, at least in my part of Minnesota. When I visit my daycares and child care centers, they're very much learning centers today. Maybe they're not, doing what some think they should do, but I think they're good. But should all parents have the opportunity to bring, or especially single moms, their children to a daycare that's quality? I think that was the initiative of the scholarship program. And I do want to say it was Republicans who led the charge on scholarships, because former Representative Barb Sikora was very instrumental. I mean, she had to drag me kicking and screaming, maybe not screaming, but kicking, along the way to even acknowledge parent aware, because I had a constituency that was very leery about some of that. But I will not answer that question. Should there be, I want parents to have opportunities. Is there some way we can provide that? Yes. Should the basic sliding fee come back? Yes, but we also have other avenues for assistance. So
is this an area, Senators, where we should be putting together an interim study commission and see if some programs that were created at different times under different situations ought to be brought into greater coordination, maybe under a single umbrella? Is that the situation we're in right now? We have ECFE, we have basic sliding fee childcare, we have scholarships. We still have programs called Way to Grow and Success by Six in Minneapolis, right, Mayor Fraser? We have, we have now school readiness, which seems to be about to grow rather large. I'm sure there are several things I'm forgetting. Many efforts to help a similar population. Do we need to do some better coordinating?
I think so, and I think this is where we completely agree. I think that fundamentally we want to have quality programming for young children, and we want accountability, and that we're 100% together on this. I introduced a bill 4 years ago to do this, and both commissioners, because remember, we have a lot of programs
we have human
in
services
health and
and
human
education,
services
yes.
for low-income kids. So I said that we need to have an umbrella program in which we bring everything and then we begin to measure outcomes. And now this is the interesting part about early childhood education. There is room for incorporating some of these creative ideas that have come predominantly from Republican members in terms of incorporating measures of accountability and figuring out how do we do training, how do we adapt programs to communities, and how do we give some flexibility to those programs in rural communities versus urban. Early childhood education gives you all of that opportunity if we really are to talk about it seriously. I had a conversation with providers in my district who are very serious about providing quality childcare, and they have quality childcare systems in place. They are centers. What we proposed was that we have a mix, that we begin to put the programs in the preschool programs in the schools and have a little bit of competition through a kind of a charter preschool programming that really gives this opportunity for culturally relevant programs. Centers that are very creative in hiring teachers and adopting models that are different, and that gives the schools a little bit of competition to say, well, we might have to think differently about how we hire people, how we train people, how we provide flexibility, how we adapt to communities. And this particular population offers that opportunity. We didn't do that, because we're not talking about kids, in my opinion, and I hate to sound like a broken record. We're talking about the political aspect of funding for these kids and how that positions us for re-election. And that's a different conversation. So when you don't talk about kids and opportunities and how, Representative Erickson and I can work on a common agenda for young kids, then the situation gets lost. And ironically, we have very little money for scholarships because we had a noisy group in there. We had very little money for pre-K because we had a noisy group in there, but we don't have a plan. So that's the disappointing part of how we use this population for political purposes.
Anything to add to that, Senator Clausen, from your observation?
Well, I've had a chance to visit some of our, there's a difference between child care and learning centers, and I think we're moving in the right direction by having a system where we rate these centers. I know I've been at some where all the people are certified that are teaching these young children. I've also been at some where the people teaching are not certified and the person that's an aide is certified. So I think we need greater consistency on establishing standards, a rating system. And I'm certainly not opposed that I think we have I've witnessed some very fine private centers that are doing a terrific job with young children. So I don't think it's strictly something for public schools to do, but there are some benefits too of public schools doing that, in that everyone.
Well, the rating system actually is the subject of a question that I'd like to raise with you. There was a sense among some of the folks who've been working on this for many years that coming into this session there was a broad consensus to support the parent-aware rating system and scholarships to help so that students could have access to those 4-star rated programs. There was a sense that momentum to support parent-aware and scholarships was lost, that some kind of a fork in the road happened that was a surprise to people in this room. Those of you who lived through this period, what can you say about that? Was there something that changed the argument for a parent-aware approach?
I think it might be we wanted to provide opportunity for all. That we weren't going to target it, that we wanted this universal pre-K for all children, not a targeted approach. Just because a child might be in the middle class, that doesn't mean that they are getting what they need to be successful as they go into pre-kindergarten or kindergarten and then through the system. So
should public school programs also be rated via the parent-aware system that has been established? Should that become a universal system? I see Senator Torres raise his head nodding yes.
I think so. I think it presents an opportunity. I think this whole idea, when we were talking about the funding, conceptualizing preschool program and really figuring out pre-K programs, how they would look like and everything, This whole conversation about what they should look like, who are going to be the teachers, how are we going to measure our, none of that was part of the conversation. It was, we need, $700 million, and we should just put it in a formula and give it to them. And that is what some of us are saying, no. And I think this is where the argument about parent aware, quality, cultural competency, parent connection, community-based programming is just so incredibly important, especially for these young children. These are for all children, absolutely for all children, but for young children, these elements of connecting to their culture, to their language, connection to the parent, the importance of family presence, all of that is so essential, and I don't think that conversation has taken place in a meaningful way. I think the answer to your question is that unfortunately we politicized, and depending on what group decided to be the strong voice behind it, we decided, oh well, it's the union, so I cannot be for that. Well, it's the whatever business group that wants to privatize education, so I cannot be for the scholarships. And then the conversation disintegrated. Very unfortunate, but I think it was a kind of this political, framing that was attached. And honestly, it was not the doing, I think, of the actual individuals who have been advocating for this funding.
Many of the people in the audience have submitted cards asking about other aspects of the E12 bill. Preschool's been where the fight's been, where the action has been on this veto, but it's not the whole story.
May I interject
certainly.
something before we leave this topic? We have an Office of Early Learning. Melvin Carter is in charge. We have two departments, very strong departments, Human Services and Education, involved in this whole scope of things. And I remember under former Governor Arnie Carlson, we had the Department of Children, Families, and Learning. And it just really brought a lot of confusion. So perhaps Melvin Carter should be thinking about for one, do I simplify these applications for parent aware? Because I've heard from my providers, they get rather convoluted. They're many pages long, and I'm not sure in the end if what is accomplished is accomplished. So, I think those are things that the Office of Early Learning should take on. And, if there's a conflict within my caucus, it's, we like small government. And so, when government starts to intrude, and if the departments are pushing parent aware from a certain perspective, some of my colleagues raise questions. And I was one of those years ago that, Senator or Representative Skor had to kind of nurture.
I remember those years.
You do.
The arguments have changed substantially at the legislature, and all of you who've been part of that deserve actually some credit for that change. Well, so while pre-K indisputably brings benefits to children, families, and society, the long-term effects can be diminished if these children then enroll in struggling K-12 systems. What do you think needs to happen in K-12, especially if we go now with a 2% plus 2% on the formula? Some people might actually call that a 2 plus 4. What will actually change to continue the gains that we hope to achieve with pre-K? And I'll start with the old school principal here, Senator Clausen.
Well, I think sometimes we don't give our public schools enough credit. There are things going on, innovations, teacher training, a great deal going on. Yesterday, I visited our magnet school, STEM magnet school in District 196, Cedar Park Elementary. John Garcia is the principal there, and I gave John a proclamation from the Senate, but he was elected as the STEM Principal of the Year for the state of Minnesota. And John and I had a nice conversation. In his school, his students of color are performing at 70% proficiency, 7 points below the white students. And he talked about the programs to make that happen and how they're making the gains and what are they doing. So I think there's a lot going on in our public schools to address that achievement gap, to provide opportunities for all students, and I think that's an ongoing process. And to do that, you need resources. I'm very happy to see the per pupil allocation of 2%, 2%. That's going to provide the resources for schools to continue. It's going to provide many schools with the ability not to have to try to pass a local referendum, and so they can continue to do some of the great work that they are doing in narrowing that achievement gap and providing opportunities for all students.
This is a question that you actually could maybe respond to because I bet you follow it. What's happened to the funding for principal academies to improve the quality and capacity of our school principals?
It's still there.
Still there?
Yes.
It is, but it got changed in the House. This was a
That's
bill.
okay.
This was a bill that I carried, and we have two principals academies that are currently operating in the state of Minnesota. One is at Mankato through the Minsky system, and the other is the University of Minnesota. And so we had funding in the original bill for both institutions. Somehow, in the last days of the session, Mankato was removed from the House bill, and that's what went into the final bill, which is now being discussed, of course, and was vetoed by the governor. But I went through a program in the 1980s. It was sponsored by the Blandin Foundation at that time, and it was a great growth opportunity to be with colleagues, to be with professionals that would come in and provide the training and the discussion that really, I think, helped me become better at being a principal and serving students. So I'm a great supporter of that.
Yeah. Does that have support in the Republican-controlled House as well? Those kinds of teacher and principal training programs?
Well, very much so. At least the program at the university. I don't know much about the Mankato program, but I'm sure it's going to be okay along, in the future years. Former Commissioner Alice Segrin and former Commissioner Representative Alice Segrin was a leader in that and still is. And I have two principals of Malacca who recently entered the program and at the University of Minnesota. They say nothing but good. I have other principals who have gone through it, and so from my perspective, the University of Minnesota has done an outstanding job. So let's keep doing it until we know Mankato's on par. But I wanted to go back and say something about what's been happening across the years. I'm in my 16th year. I'm really not in my 9th session yet because I'm always in the middle because I was a special election in 1998. But the legislature has done far too much I would say, during my tenure by sticking its nose into what I think the public school can do very well on its own. What I see in law that's not been taken care of or not been used is sad because there are many good opportunities in law. But aside from that, teachers are creative, they're innovative, principals are their leaders, and parents want to be involved. And when the legislature starts making so many changes, year after year after year. I remember, I started teaching in 1964, and things were nice and quiet. The 70s, no. Outcome-based education came along. And suddenly we're getting all of this stuff coming at us as teachers. And I sat down with my English professionals and I said, I think we're doing a damn good job. Let's just keep doing it. Why do we want the Department of Education telling us we now have to do thus and so when we've been really doing well? And we had graduates from Princeton going off to every great school and college and into the military, etc. And I still get letters from my former students acknowledging that they learned so much and it helped them so much. But I think we just need to be quiet for a while. And that's why this year I was so glad we only enacted 88 new laws. That's really great because usually it would be well over 100.
I understand it's one of the lowest numbers since statehood.
Many of those would be in education, and it just seems that we never leave teachers alone. For example, just to learn what the standards are. Because outcome-based education was in the 70s, and then we evolved into the profile of learning, and it's something in between, and then we went to standards-based. And standards-based seems to be good, but I have many colleagues, well, I'll call them colleagues, I'm not working with them now, but I visit with them all the time. They just don't have a grasp yet of the standards. Well, if you don't have a grasp of the standards and have curriculum in place that supports them, and curriculum that parents and teachers and school leaders and the community can agree on, because remember, Common Core is kind of in there, but that's a very, very debatable issue. If they haven't had the chance to figure out how the curriculum fits in, how in the heck can they produce students who are learned enough to do really well in the tests, because the benchmarks of the standards are what make up the MCAs. So, I just want teachers to have a chance to breathe, to have a chance to absorb, to have some time to get all of this under control before we launch into, another, my committee was innovation, but I just wanted to keep it to streamlining licensure and reducing testing, and that was about it. I mean, I loved LIFO, but that's off the table, so, that's where I wanted to be, and I thought that's not going to touch teachers so much. I mean, reducing testing was really good.
Senator Torres-Ray, are there features of the K-12 portion of the bill that you'd like to highlight for this audience that are either particularly helpful or particularly hurtful as we go forward?
I think that increasing the formula was kind of a given. I thought from the very beginning, of course we're going to get to 2 because that's what the House wants, that's what the governor wants, and we know that's what is needed. So there was no brainer on that one. I'm not excited about really most of what is in here. And I respect the idea that perhaps, if 87%, 90% of white children are graduating, perhaps you can say, if you are part of that community, let's leave it alone because a lot of our children are graduating. But if you have my accent, and if you look like me, and if you're an immigrant children, and then you realize that 57% of people who look like me are not graduating, I said, no, I'm not going to leave this system alone because half of this room will not graduate if you were my kids. So I'm not okay with that. I cannot leave this system alone, and I cannot be quiet about the outcome. So I think that the previous question with respect to what needs to happen in education, to me, is the next step. I think that education has become very politicized, where you have $9 billion, then you talk about politics and where that money should go. And I think we need to step out of that, and we need to bring back a more academic, strategic conversation about what the next step is for education, for public education in Minnesota, both at the K-12 and higher ed level. Because without it, we're going to continue to be in this path of trying to figure out where does the money go, and don't talk to me about my 100% white district where I don't have these people, and hopefully they will not come in my direction. That's Minneapolis's problem. That's where all the Latino and black folk are. So go talk to them and figure out if you can split their district or privatize their schools. And that's not the case. Actually, when you look at what is happening in many of rural districts and suburban districts, the gaps are bigger than what they are in Minneapolis and St. Paul. And they don't have a plan. So I argue that it is time for us, I agree with Representative Erickson, to step aside and say, do we need a group of experts who can really come forward and talk about key aspects of public education and funding, key academic aspects of academic growth, and how do they get implemented, what is the cost of it? And that needs to be done in the state of Minnesota, regardless of who has the majority, the minority in the Senate, who is the governor and who isn't. Because I think that it's been too long since we've had that strategic conversation about elements of academic education, academic growth, and what it needs and what needs to be in place and how we need to invest. Teacher training and principal training are pretty good examples of how important these elements are. And we're not investing in teacher training because we're talking about contracts. Contracts have nothing to do with training. We don't train teachers in Minnesota. We don't have programs of induction for teachers in the state of Minnesota. I don't know, you probably know that we don't train teachers. We don't have a budget for training teachers in the state of Minnesota. So it's a pretty tragic state of affairs for the key elements of education, including how we treat our teachers in the state of Minnesota today.
One in your audience referred to what has transpired in the non-pre-K portion of the bill as a bill with limited innovation, for good or for ill, and then asked Senator Clausen to please say a bit about your effort for teacher-powered schools. There was a $1 million appropriation. He said it was cut from the final bill. Will that idea be back? And please explain what it is.
Teacher-powered school was the idea that let's put teachers in charge. Let's make those in the classroom closest to the teaching and learning, let's them make decisions about how to really structure the school, how to make that school successful. And it was a bill that I helped sponsor. Unfortunately, it did not pass. But I think that's something, when you think about a classroom teacher, there's very little mobility in that position. You are a classroom teacher when you start, and many of our classroom teachers retire as classroom teachers. And I think making an opportunity for them to take charge of that classroom, of that school, I think is a great opportunity for them for growth, for them to learn and grow as a teacher, and to become more engaged in the process of running a school. I think it's important.
And why did that not go forward?
That we already have it in law.
We do.
So I argued that we didn't need another law because we already have it. Former Representative John Benson, who was instrumental in moving this forward, and prior to him, former Representative Karen Cleansing. We have site governed. We have every opportunity, as we have seen in this state, for teachers to come forward and be that, if we want to call it, teacher-empowered school. We have that in law, and so we don't need to add to the law. If you didn't make it, Senator Clausen, it's my fault, because I said, it's already there. Why are we going to add another law when we have a district, and Representative Ross Peterson represents that district, and they presented in our committee, and they did it without the legislature. They looked at the site-governed law, patterned it after that, but they did it on their own. Yes, go for it. Teachers, yes. We don't need a law.
But maybe I should let Senator Clausen respond to that.
Yeah, the bill is basically to provide some funding so that more schools could become engaged in the process and develop teacher-led schools. So basically that's what I do.
Well, and since you've got the floor, say a little bit, please, too, about another issue that's of some long-standing and has been dear to some of us, the PSEO program and dual credit. What this was going to be a year to bring some more energy and funding to those opportunities for high school students. Where did that wind up?
Yeah. This was something near and dear to my heart, dual credit or concurrent enrollment. Many of you are familiar with the University of Minnesota College and the Schools. I was actually on the board as a principal at the time at the University of Minnesota program. And it provides college credit for students who are in high school to stay in their home school and earn college credit. And it's been around for quite a while, but it's been underfunded. The funding has remained flat, but the number of students that are involved is over 55,000 students are involved in the program right now. So what was happening is that the cost of that program, which was initiated by the state and funded by the state initially, was being passed on to the school districts. So initially it was $155 per student enrolled. That's what the colleges would receive for the program. And what was happening, though, that in reality it was about $38 the school districts were actually getting, depending upon the number of students that were enrolled. So then the school district had to make up the difference in the dollar amount. And so we provided some additional funding for the program. We provided some additional funding at the post-secondary level for colleges, universities to develop more programs. It's a very popular program. It helps for the student that is college ready, for some enrichment, for getting a taste of what college is really like, what are those expectations. Part of my work in developing that bill was last year I went to 15 different school districts around the state that have concurrent enrollment. There are 24 institutions, either Mid-Stu or University of Minnesota, that offer concurrent enrollment programs. One of the things in meeting with those school districts, met with teachers, parents, students, school superintendents, principals, and actually school board members as well at some of the stops. And the one thing we were talking about teacher-led schools. One of the things that at every stop the teacher said, this is the greatest staff development activity I've ever participated in. Because in the summer they go and work with a college professor and make sure that their standards that are being replicated in the high school is the same that college student is receiving on campus. So it's a great program, and it's another opportunity for reducing that cost of a college education for students. And we have in District 196, again, Rosemont, Apple Valley, Eagan, large, last year alone, $26 million was saved in college tuition by students that were enrolled in those programs. That's a considerable amount of money.
But that funding should stay in the bill. I don't know if it'll get increased. But
how much did you get again? I didn't catch the number.
Right now, it was at $2 million, and it stayed at $2 million. we were asking for 9, we got another 2, so now it's at $4 million. And there was no funding at the post-secondary institution. For instance, the University of Minnesota, there are some base courses, literature for one, that were full. And so we provided some additional funding so that they could expand the program so more schools could enter into those opportunities. So that's something that I think is a good thing that we did, and I'm sure it'll stay in the
and Representative Erickson, I remember speaking with you about this issue at the beginning of the session. There's broad bipartisan support, is there not, for this dual enrollment?
Yes, we like that very much.
We've got about 10 minutes left, panel, and let's use this last 10 minutes to talk about where we go from here. With one good question here from the audience to get us underway. There's a concern, an awareness that we are heading into a period of potential teacher shortages, and in particularly greater Minnesota, that's already being seen. The question says, will any new early childhood programs exacerbate that problem? I'd like to have you talk both about early childhood and more generally, what are we going to do as a state facing a teacher shortage at a time when when the dropout rate from the teaching ranks in the early years of people's professional careers is pretty high. We have folks here who have a lot of experience in this area. Maybe Representative Erickson, you can start talking about, from a rural perspective, what's the situation with regard to the numbers of teachers?
Well, we have a teacher shortage in rural Minnesota, but I'd like to say that I thought that in my negotiations, or in our negotiations with Senator Dahl, Senator Stumpf, and Senator Pratt, as we discussed in our conference committee, because in education we had 2 subcommittees, one on testing and one on streamlining teacher licensure, especially geared at offering an opportunity for those educated in other states or licensed in other states to be able to get Minnesota licenses. We had a very good back and forth, and we came to a good agreement on streamlining, and I think that's still in the bill. My message to the governor was, try not to touch policy if you can avoid it, unless it's going to be an enhancement. But I think if we can open the doors, and the Board of Teaching is being audited now, and I think that's a good thing. Because I think part of the stumbling block has been some indecision or some misunderstanding between the licensing division of MDE and the Board of Teaching in making a smooth entry from out of state. But I think candidates like to come to teach in Minnesota, and because we have a pretty vibrant corporate world, a lot of women come, wives come with their husbands, and they want to teach in our state. I hear from them about every week about how can they become licensed. So,
but is that going to be a sufficient response to the shortage that we are seeing ahead? I see a head shaking no, Senator Torres-Ray.
Absolutely, we have a crisis. If you look at the numbers, the people who are pursuing the teaching profession has gone down by 40%. People don't want to pursue. You talk to young people, they don't want to pursue the teaching profession. So we have a tremendous deficit in all the schools right now. Then we have a number of people who, towards the end of their programs, they realize that they're going to have to go into getting licensure and taking all of these exams and all of that. And they, now with the labor market as strong as it is, they're pursuing other things with those degrees. So we drop by 20% at that point on the small number that we have of people who go into pursuing the license to teach in Minnesota. And then during the 3 years, which are very tough times for teachers in the classroom, many teachers are leaving the teaching profession. You saw what happened in Minneapolis. We had 250 new teachers that had to be trained, that had to be hired last year. We have a significant problem in Minnesota. We have a crisis because we don't have the numbers, because people, and honestly, the teaching profession, people are demoralized right now. And I think this is a profession where we really need to talk about incentives. What do we need to do in order to pay more and provide these opportunities for teachers to stay in the classroom? Some people are talking about offering, summer programs where teachers can teach abroad, so that this whole aspect of global education becomes kind of an incentive for teachers to stay in the classroom, because it is difficult with the challenges that they face in the classroom, the salaries that we have right now. I don't think that we have sufficient incentives for people to come in the classroom. And then add to that the whole issue of recruiting teachers from diverse backgrounds. We just truly have a deficit there that we cannot. ELL, teachers to teach children with disabilities, as well as in general, urban core diverse populations where we have high incidence of poverty. We have very hard times trying to recruit teachers for those populations.
Well, Senator Clausen, what would be a kind of a comprehensive approach at the state level to a looming teacher shortage?
I actually carried the teacher licensure bill. That was my bill. And there were things that we needed to change about teachers coming new to our state that had been licensed in other states. Minnesota is known as a very difficult state, having high standards for teacher licensure, and that's not necessarily bad. But last night, I received an email from a father, Mr. Devine. His son has taught 7 years art in Pillager, Minnesota. He's losing his job because he has not passed the teacher basic skills exam in writing. He's 2 points away. He's taken it several times. I don't know if many of you know, but you have to pass a basic skills exam in the state of Minnesota to get a teaching license. And you do have, we actually added the year. You had 3 opportunities. In other words, if you had a job, we're teaching for 3 years, and we're unable to pass the exam, you would have to be removed from your teaching position. You'd lose your license. Part of the bill that I authored went to 4 years. The other part of it is with Dan Devine, is this fellow's name. Dan has a learning disability. He's not given any accommodations when he takes that test. Now, he was given accommodations in high school and in college. He teaches art. His superintendent came down and testified on his behalf. His principal testified on his behalf. He's an asset to the community in that he's involved in lots of community activities, but Dan is going to lose his license. He's not going to be able to teach anymore. And I think there are some things in the teacher licensure issue that we need to look at about the testing to qualify as a teacher. We made some significant changes in out-of-state teachers getting licensed in Minnesota. And I really can't disagree with a lot of things that Senator Torres Ray has said. Teaching right now is not a desirable occupation for a lot of people. The number of people entering the field is down. There's no question about it. A lot of very talented young people are seeing that there are other opportunities that they can make more money, do other things, and so that's something that we have to reestablish, I think, in the eyes of the public, that teaching is a good profession, it's an honorable profession.
How do we keep focus? This group's whole purpose is to focus on closing the achievement gap, to bring the young people who have not been succeeding into more of a pattern of success. How do we stay focused on the achievement gap at a time when the teacher shortage that's looming and is almost a crisis, maybe it is a crisis, Representative Erickson says in her area. How do we keep the focus on the achievement gap when the teacher shortage is going to become the next big thing?
Well, that's a good question. I'm also on the higher ed committee, and one of the things, we look at a lot of projections. Where is the state going? And our workforce of the future in 2020 is going to be made up primarily of our residents of color. And we also know our residents of color are in great need of more education, and we have many more occupations requiring additional education. The things that we've been talking about right now, about targeting interventions for preschoolers, making sure that we have that support all the way through the system when you're in elementary, middle school, high school, providing opportunities like college in the schools. Those are things that we need to invest in, because our future workforce, the future workforce that is going to be paying the taxes, is going to be coming from that segment of our population. And if we don't invest in that group right now, we're going to be in a difficult place in the next 15 to 20 years.
Senator Torres Ray and Representative Erickson, last parting shots here. What would you advise this group to keep their focus on the achievement gap? What should they be urging now?
I think that teacher training and teacher preparation is a very key element, and we need to do more in trying to really put together a plan to recruit more teachers from diverse backgrounds who have the credentials to teach. I think is urgent and is critical. The other piece that I think we really need to do is adopt some measures of accountability into the dollars that we put, especially for targeted approaches. Right now in my district, I'm going to talk briefly because I think this illustrates exactly what the challenges that large districts face. The districts, out of a very important campaign that went on predominantly in communities of color, decided that they were going to direct the budget in a direction where the money follows the kid. As you know, if you are a child of high poverty, ELL, special needs, you receive more dollars, significant more dollars. And so we said that these dollars really need to follow the kid and that these targeted approaches need to take place. Well, in the process, what happened in Minneapolis is that we left a gap in those schools where we don't have a lot of those children that are, ELL, high incidence of poverty. And these are more affluent, predominantly white children who are doing very well, and now we don't have the funding to pay for their teachers, right? And so we quickly went to the drawing board and said, oh my God, so what do we do? So they said, oh, well, let's put some money into the Gift and Talented program, and then these kids who are gifted and talented, they will receive some funding. So then the formulas became very complicated. In all of these, all I'm saying is that this redrawing of dollars without a plan, and guess what? Minneapolis has not put a plan for these schools on academic outcomes and training for teachers and who are the teachers that go where and where are the measures in place. We just simply did a remapping of the dollars, and I think that is a problem. We are remapping insufficient dollars, and at the end, this is a mathematical formula that is not going to work because you put dollars in a different place and then you create gaps in others. I think that what we need to do is we need to adopt the measures, what constitute a good measure of quality, and how do we address achievement gap through these measures, whether that's training, dual enrollment, concurrent enrollment, early childhood, and what is the cost, and then we move in that direction. So it's a different kind of planning. We plan on the ideas that work and what is the cost, and then we go to the map and see that we don't have that, and I don't think we have done that in the state of Minnesota in the last 20 years, and so we keep redrawing formulas on funding that is just not there to address these very specific needs.
And Representative Erickson, you get the last word today. What would you say is the way for this group to continue to work on the achievement gap?
Well, I'm probably not going to answer the question as well as you would like, but I think teacher preparation programs need to be in the business of recruiting. They need to be in the schools. They need to be talking to places where we have counselors and we have great principals like Mr. Klosser was. There is a place for teacher preparation. It needs to be improved. I certainly have issues with how they prepare our teachers, but they also need to be inviting and help young people understand the great adventure that teaching is, because that's what it is. It's the best thing you could ever do because you work with children, and I happen to work with older children. Nevertheless, you have such responsibility for preparing them to be great citizens. So teacher preparation programs need to get off their duffs and do some recruiting and selling their programs, and perhaps looking at Representative Erdahl's provision in our bill will help. Education Minnesota, I talk to them repeatedly about helping recruit, offering scholarships. We have a loan forgiveness in the higher ed bill that might help. I think we need to look at ways of reshaping what the teaching profession is about. I'm hoping that just my saying it now will help teacher preparation programs move in a new direction and reassess what they're doing to prepare our teachers. When I visit schools, the new teachers tell me that they just don't feel like they come prepared out of college. And I acknowledge, I said, well, you're not going to be totally prepared. Remember, you're never in a real situation when you're student teaching, even though the teacher under whom you're working is not in the room, but it's still not your classroom. So teacher preparation programs, I think, have a great responsibility in this, and painting a new picture of what it is to be this great part of a child's life, imparting knowledge and teaching skills. And I also would like to see the business community and those trained in hands-on, the plumbing. I know there are unions that do this, so I wish they'd become more influential in training children or getting into our schools to help the staff train children in these hands-on professions like
Well,
plumbing,
that's
electricity.
lots of food for thought for this committee. Please join us in thanking this panel. Thanks, everybody.
Please thank our moderator, Rosa.
Thanks, everybody.
This is